In my research, I have found that people who experience social class mobility may learn and become somewhat comfortable in their new environment, though I've heard that's rare, but their first class will always be their identity. For example, I've already shared on here that one of my first class studies was on white men because when we first started looking at social classes and identity, we had to make sure that racism and sexism weren't interfering with the variables there because race and gender are closely related to class in the US. And I asked them a lot of questions, and one of those was on the social class disclosure study, which I already shared, but another hasn't been published. And that's what we call our insider without study, because it's where we looked at data where they talked about being in a new class but not feeling fully part of it. And they referred to code switching behaviors. Code switching is when you're around a group where the majority isn't like you, and so you have to pretend to fit in. And it's very well studied among race and LGBTQIA plus groups. So we looked at it from a class perspective, and we found that even white men who are from lower class backgrounds, when they're in a middle or upper class work environment, they feel like they have to code switch. They talked about being very aware of social class differences at work, not feeling like they are ever one of them, even if they work with those people, they don't feel like they belong in that class. They talked about having skills in both worlds and switching between those skills. This is what we saw as code switching. And they said that no matter how high they moved up, they still identified culturally with their first class. Let me share with you one of my favorite quotes of all time from one of these respondents. I get really mad if people think I'm not smart enough or if I'm not sharp enough to be allowed in the same conversation. If I'm dismissed, I don't like to be dismissed. And if I react, if I knee-jerk reacted, it's coming from way back. It's the roofer that was pounding nails that comes out. That's the guy. The redneck comes out in me and just says, yeah, I'm as academically astute as you are. However, I can still swing a hammer. Love it. And that's something I try to tell employers all the time, that even if somebody's moved up and they're making the salary you're paying them, that doesn't mean culturally that they feel like they belong there. So cross-class communication is still very important, especially at work.